From choice making, we can then think about moving on to more complex systems. So I wanted to spend some time looking at communication boards and communication books, some of sort of the standard AAC kinds of supports that probably many of you have seen in a variety of settings. So often when we're thinking about communication boards or communication books, we're talking about pages of graphic symbols. It's usually graphic symbols, although certainly you can do this with photographs. It's just way more work. And you usually end up having to have fewer images per page, because if you try and shrink photographs too small, they get to the point where you can't see what they are anymore. Messages with communication boards or communication books are typically communicated by the individual pointing to the symbol and showing someone what they're pointing to. So that means that the individual in need of a communication book, so the kid with autism, for example, needs to understand that if I'm gonna point to a symbol to tell somebody something, I need to have the attention of that other person, right? This is something that individuals with autism typically have difficulty with, right? This is one of those key core deficits that individuals with autism have. It's one of the things that we notice when we're looking at identifying autism in young kids, is this lack of understanding of other people's perspectives, right? And it's not a thing that, you know, only affects those who are really impacted by autism. Even very capable people with autism often have difficulty with this concept that, you know, what you see is different from what I'm seeing, right? And so I've seen kids with autism. In fact, I had a student once who was learning to ask to go to the bathroom, and he had a bathroom symbol. And he would hold his bathroom symbol in his hand and point to it while peeing his pants. Now, he thought he was asking to be taken to the bathroom, but there was nobody else around, right? So just pointing isn't communication. And so that's a really important thing to remember. So giving somebody a communication board and kind of like, well, go forth, communicate, usually doesn't happen. And particularly for individuals with autism, it's a really difficult skill because they don't realize that when they're pointing, there isn't automatically somebody watching, right? And so part of the behavior of using a communication board is gain the attention of somebody else and then point to what you want to point to. Okay, so that's really, really important. We'll talk about other things that you can do instead of point-based systems, because point-based systems aren't always the best option for individuals with autism, but sometimes they'll work quite well. Regardless, it's important to model the use of communication boards. And in fact, it's important to model the use of any kind of communication system that you're using. So I'm going to ask you some questions. If you are the parent of a brand new little baby, and you're a hearing parent and your baby is hearing, when do you expect that baby to start talking, roughly? Like words? Yeah, about 12 months, give or take, right? Now, what do you do between birth and 12 months? Because that child's not talking to you. But what do? You talk to the baby, right? So you talk and 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 talk to that baby for months. Now, you're not expecting at 2 months that baby talks, and you don't go after 2 months, well, it's not talking to me, never mind. Right? Nobody would do that. You talk and talk and talk and talk and talk to that baby. Everybody around that baby is talking. That baby is like hearing so much talking, and then they start to talk. Amazing. Now, if I've got a child, deaf or hearing, of deaf parents who are ASL users, well, they're signing at that baby from the minute that baby is born, okay? Now, whether that baby is hearing or deaf, their first language will be ASL, because that's the first language they're being exposed to. Now, these muscles develop slightly faster than these muscles for speaking. And so usually around about 7 months, give or take, babies start to give sign approximations, mama, milk, right? These are approximations. But again, this is no surprise. The parents have been signing at them for months. Now I want you to think about what happens for AAC users. So first of all, they don't have AAC from birth, right? Because we don't know that they might need it. So it might be years before they even get access to AAC. But when they do, we give them a communication board, or we give them a communication device, or whatever it is that we're going to give them. And we kind of give it to them, and we all talk around them. They have their thing, we talk, we wait. And I've literally seen, 3 weeks in, people saying, well, he's had it for 3 weeks and he's not using it. He's either too disabled, or he's just not motivated to engage in interactions. And the AAC gets taken away. I've seen an awful lot of communication boards and an awful lot of like $10,000 devices being used as doorstops, right? But now let's think about this in terms of the logic of kids learning to communicate. We talk to typically developing babies all the time for 12 months before we expect single words from them. What do we do for AAC users? We never model their system. They never see someone use a communication board. They never see someone use a communication device. Yet we're expecting that within a few weeks they're going to be using it. That seems crazy and unfair. So that's something to pay attention to. It's something that we've learned over the years. If an individual is using AAC, we need to be good users of that AAC as well, so that we can model. And there's a family, and I'll make a point if Deborah can remind me. I'll give Deborah a link to a parent's blog. Now, she does not have a child with autism. She has a child with a quite rare syndrome. But her daughter, Maya, is about 7 or 8 now, and wasn't developing speech, right? And mom was trying all kinds of things when she was sort of 1.5, 2, 3, and eventually found her way to a particular app. And so she's been keeping a blog since her daughter was quite little. And mom is now finishing up a graduate degree in speech language pathology because she found the system to be somewhat frustrating in terms of the support that her child was not getting. But she found an app that was a good fit for her child, a very robust AAC app with lots and lots of vocabulary and language, and that entire family uses that app in their regular interactions. So mom models, dad models. In fact, when she had her second child, she exposed that baby to the app, and when that baby was, 6, 7 months, typically developing baby, he had a way to communicate. He'd use the app too, right? The daughter would show the baby how to use the app, right? So they're all communicating. Now, she went into school with literacy skills at par and even slightly above those of her same age peers. She now uses a lot of phonetic typing right? So her spelling's not great, but phonetically, right? She types out, so instead of just using icons, she'll type stuff out. They have other issues, right? This girl has other kinds of issues, but her communication has come along so well. And the reason that it has primarily is because mom's done an excellent job of modeling use of AAC. The whole family has, right? All the time. Because they wanted her to use it, right? So if this is how she's communicating, this is the language we have to model to her, right? It would be like putting a child in a French immersion program where nobody speaks French and expecting that, the kid's gonna come out of the French immersion program speaking French, but nobody's ever spoken French to him, right? That seems silly. Right? But that's what we do to kids all the time in terms of AAC. It's like, nobody uses this, we're gonna give it to you. We're not gonna show you anything, we're not gonna model it, but we're gonna expect that within a few weeks you're using it. That kind of seems insane, right? So remember that, model the use of whatever it is you're using. So here are some examples of communication boards. These are boards that you can purchase yourself, and they're already pre-made. Carol Goossens and her colleagues, Carol Goossens is an individual who worked primarily with individuals with severe speech and physical impairments, so think young kids with cerebral palsy, but also other developmental disabilities. And she's still in the field, But they created a number of these kind of topic-specific communication boards. Now, these can be purchased from Mayor Johnson in book form. They also come in a disc form, so you can open them up in BoardMaker and you can adapt them a little bit. So there are a bunch of boards with different sizes of symbols. She also talks about color coding. So this is an example of a color-coded board, not one of their boards. This is one I think that I made. But having different color codes by parts of speech, for some individuals that helps them locate things. I've found for individuals with autism that often this is not a good idea, right? I, in fact, remember when I was a new teacher and all excited by things that I went to conferences and learned about. I went to a session and I learned about these great boards, and I bought the books and I went back to school and I said to my SEAs, when you have your little prep times, here's what I want you to do. I want you to copy these. I've marked all the pages of the boards that I think we'll use, copy them, mount them onto construction paper. I bought you a whole bunch of highlighters. Here's the color coding chart, color code all of these. And so they did this lovely job, right? They were coloring. I brought them home, I colored at night. We colored and colored and colored. We laminated. And then the idea is that you put these boards in the environment where they're used. So in the classroom, at the Lego Center was the Lego board. And we had a fish in the classroom, there was the fish board on the fish tank. And in the reading area, there was the reading board. And I'll never forget the day that Darren walked in after we swapped out the black and white ones for the color ones. He kind of went like this and he just sort of vibrated, and it was way too much color. And we had to take them down, and I had to do a lot of apologizing, and I think I brought like chocolates for my aides. I'm so sorry. Here, have some chocolate. I'm very sorry about that. We won't do that again. All right, so for some kids with autism, too much color. It was like little squares of color everywhere, and poor Darren kind of went, oh my, this is too much. But some individuals find that this kind of color coding is helpful. But these boards, they're one topic, right? So it's a communication board for one specific activity. You kind of pull it out for that activity, and it's got the relevant vocabulary for that activity. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do. You can also make books of individual communication boards. So this is a book that I made for an individual who was learning to just request specific items or specific activities. So we didn't want a lot of different types of words. It was pretty much just nouns that he was asking for, right? So he had pages, and we had them index tabbed. I made this is the activity, this is the where, this is the what. So the activity page had all of the different things that he could do. The where page had different places he could go, and he could flip to a page and then point to something that he wanted. So he was working on really early basic communication skills. Yesterday I told you about the time that I got my brand new BoardMaker discs, and I spent my spring break making a communication book. This is from that book. I had a specific student in mind. She was a 12-year-old student that I had who was deaf and had autism and had no communication system up to the age of 12. She had nothing. She pointed to things, but she was one of those kids with autism too, who was quite happy to just kind of like sit and look through books. So she didn't make a lot of trouble, which, right, those kinds of kids, sometimes then people forget about them, right, because they're easy. She wasn't running around ransacking the place. So she sat and looked at books, and that was all fine. And I came in and went, oh, she doesn't have a communication system, let's put something together. And she loved this. She packed this binder around with her everywhere. She's one of the few kids with autism where I didn't need to do a whole bunch of teaching around, you need to get the person's attention before you point to stuff in the book. And I'll remember taking her to McDonald's, which was one of her favorite places to go. Taking her to McDonald's, and she's in line, she's got a fistful of cash, she's got her communication book open, and I'm kind of behind her because I want her to do this as much on her own as she can. And I remember watching her go up to the counter, and there wasn't a staff person at the counter at that moment. They were off, getting the fries or whatever. And she stood, and she's a deaf kid. She doesn't hear, like nothing. But she doesn't know that other people can hear stuff. She'd figured that out. So she would make this clucking noise with her tongue, like that. So she's standing at the McDonald's counter going, like trying to call someone over. When someone finally turns around and sees her, she's got her communication board. She turns the communication board around. I know. Then I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. She turned it around so that they could see it properly, and she stood there and pointed, and she looked, and she watched. And when she saw them do this, then she's like, okay, now the fries. Totally got how this worked, right? But she was a great communicator, and one of the few where I didn't actually need to do a lot of instruction. She was just so ripe and ready for it. She's such a smart girl who had just really been waiting for a communication system, right? She could go through that book. She had, I don't know, hundreds of pages, and she could flip through that thing and find stuff. And this was all before we had access to decent technology. Like, I wish I had her at 12 now with an iPad, because we would have done amazing things. She's in her 30s now. Yeah, that's frightening. Yeah, she's like old. Okay, so that's an example of a communication board. Well, old because I feel like now that makes me old, right? I'm used to my students being like this. So any student who is now above 20 is like old, because now that means that I'm really old. Because, you know, I was their teacher. It seems kind of wrong. This is an example of a communication book that I made for a really unique situation and ended up using in a way that I hadn't anticipated. How many of you have heard of the Dreams Take Flight program? A couple of you. So it's kind of like Make-A-Wish, but not. So Air Canada runs it, and they gather up kids who have disabilities, they throw them on a plane, and they take them to Disneyland for the day. Oh, wow, right. Now, here's how this worked. One year they decided that they were going to take 6 kids from the School for the Deaf as part of this, right? They literally filled the plane. So because it was 6 deaf kids, there needed to be an interpreter to go with them, deaf kids, right? And the way that this works is that when they get to Disneyland, the LAPD and fire department volunteers come together and go to Disneyland with the kids and help for the day. Well, they're not going to be signing, so we have to make sure there's an interpreter. So one of my students, who was deaf and had an intellectual disability, got selected of all of the kids at the School for the Deaf to go. Now, the other kids did not have aids, but this kid had a part-time SCA because she needed a bit of support, and she could get a little out of hand. They picked her, but I was told, we can't send an extra person with her. We only have 1 seat for an adult, and so it has to be the interpreter. Oh, well, this could be fun. And she's a lovely kid, not a troublemaking kind of kid, but she gets very excited at the best of times. And this is Disneyland, right? So, thinking she's going to get on this plane, and they had to be at the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning or some such thing, right? At 6, they were like flying and arriving, and then they threw them all on a bus and drove them to Disneyland like as the gates were opening. And then they're there literally all day until they shut the gates down at night, right? Like think midnight, drive them back to the airport, put them back on a plane, and fly them home, right? This is like a 24-hour extravaganza. So I'm thinking the girl's gonna need to communicate, right? She had great sign language skills. She's a good signer, but she's gonna be with a bunch of hearing people that don't understand her, and she's gonna be excited as all get out. This will be a problem. So I made a communication board, or a book actually, that went into one of those little photo albums, 4x6 photo albums from the dollar store. This is just one sort of top side, bottom side of the book when you had the book opened. Every top half of the book had this. This was the same every page that you flipped to, because it had kind of some core vocabulary. Things like I want and let's go and where, bathroom being very important, tired, hungry, thirsty, that kind of stuff, my feet hurt, right? The important Disneyland comments. And on the bottom side, every page that you went to was a different land in Disneyland. And I went onto the Disneyland website and grabbed screenshots, pictures of the different rides. And so these are all of the different rides and attractions in that land. And then I had a page with restaurants and all that kind of stuff. So I sent this with her, gave her a fanny pack, had this in it, had a little instruction page on the front, that said if you need to tell her something, open the book, point to the picture. If she needs to say something, have her point to pictures. I grabbed the interpreter and said, all right, so when you're in line, like about to walk through the gates, always at Disneyland, they have a list of any rides that are closed for the day. I'm enclosing a Sharpie. If you could just look at the list of rides that are closed and then make sure you cross them out so that that's clear to her that they're, right? Good luck, right? I said to the aide, good luck, have a good time. I can't wait to hear all about it. Off you go. So this student lived in the dorm. She went, she came back, and she wasn't to come to school that day, like the following day, because, 24 hours, leaving LA at like midnight, getting ready. But she happened to wake up, she saw the other kids in her house getting ready for school. She's coming to school. So she comes to school the next morning, surprise, there she is. So, okay, well, fine. So, Disneyland yesterday, did you have fun? And she looked at me and went, No. Yesterday, you flew to Disneyland and the rides. Did you have fun? That's literally all I got. Now, this is a kid who's got great communication skills, who was thrilled to go to Disneyland, who I know must have loved it. No idea. So I go and I look in her bag, is this communication book there? It's not. She left it at the dorm. So I phone over to the dorm. Can someone run this book over? And they're just across the street. So someone brought the book over. Book gets there. Come here. Let's sit down with me. So we sat down side by side on a little bench in my classroom. And I opened up the book and I said, yesterday, you went to Disneyland. Did you have fun? She proceeded at that point to take the book from me and go through every page and every single ride and tell me about every single ride in ASL. She'd point to this picture, that, and she'd tell me, and this ride, and you went down, and you got wet, and this happened, and that happened, and you went upside down, and blah. She could tell me everything, but it was like there was so much excitement that she kind of couldn't access the language. You know how that is when you're either really, really excited or really, really angry about something, and you're just like, you can't get it out? That's kind of how she was. And so this book that I designed to help her understand LAPD, giving her instructions in Disneyland, ended up becoming her conversation support. So that for the next few days, whenever anybody asked her about her trip to Disneyland, she had this with her so that then she could open it up. And as soon as she saw pictures of rides, she could tell all kinds of stories. And she had many of them to tell. She had a great time. It went beautifully. Right? So that's an important thing to remember too. Sometimes the supports that we're making to help understand also help to express, right? So she had a lot of fun. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be the poor interpreter there. The interpreter did not come to work the next day. But the following day when she did come back to work, she was still looking a little haggard, although she said it all went well. But she's like, I don't know that I'd be, volunteering my services for that again. That was hard.